Okay, wait a. Okay. Phil Dupre, I'm just going to start talking while everybody's filing in.
Your mic is on.
All of our mics are working. Good test. So this panel, the panel immediately following ours, will really get into privacy and law issues. This panel is really more about advertising models, case studies, and we'll have very little, if any, consideration of legal or policy issues.
Which is a good thing.
Just to get a sense of the audience, I wonder who has any sort of advertising background. Okay, so a handful. So maybe this won't be new to you, or maybe it will. Well, you guys will be the ones that I cold call for questions. So panelists, I'm interested in hearing from you about your thoughts about the current and future state of advertising. There's this sort of prevailing narrative that advertising is getting more and more granular. In Lori's amazing talk, we heard some sort of scary possibilities. And so I'm curious about the extent to which that's actually happening. I thought a really good example was the one about the accelerometer and that you could see where someone is. And you said, I don't know if anybody's doing this. And so I'm wondering, where are we right now and where are we going? Are we going towards more and more data? Or we also see contextual ads, like ads during podcasts, doing really well. And so I wonder, what will the future hold? Is there room for kind of both models? Or is it just going to get scarier and scarier depending on your viewpoint? So to kick things off, Scott, I'm going to start with you. Scott Capuzzo is the Senior Account Manager of QuantCast. QuantCast is a data intelligence platform. It provides audience demographics and then also does some sort of tailored ad delivery. Mm-hmm. So kick us off. Where are we right now?
Sure. I mean, where I see it is that data will continue to drive marketing decisions more and more. As I was mentioning yesterday, one of my favorite quotes in the industry, which was mentioned by an ad exec a long time ago, was 50% of my advertising is working. I just don't know which 50%. And now we're getting to the point where we want to answer that as closely as possible. And so today, because we're always on a screen and always connected, as you heard a lot earlier, we know more and more about our audience than we've ever done before, which is great for marketers. So they can tailor their audience instead of hitting a demographic of, let's say, males 25 to 54, which is so broad. We can have now a one-to-one conversation with a very specific audience. And it's the data that's tailoring all of that. And it's the data that's going to help influence and where people spend their media, where the marketers spend their media.
Great. Next, Janet Eden Harris is the Chief Marketing Officer of 4Winds Interactive, which allows users to control centrally digital signage networks. So think about signs in hotels, airports, maybe on faucets.
I know. I looked at that. I said, "Do we do that? We do sell to the Smithsonian." I'm going to step back a little bit because you're right. I am the CMO for 4Winds, but it's actually sort of a part of my consulting practice. And I think the reason why I'm on the panel is because I have been a CMO for different kinds of companies. So I am in no way an expert on this topic. However, as one who has bought a lot of media, but also tried to figure out what's the strategy for the company, to me it fits into a bigger whole. So over the last couple of years, every executive, because I was going to say CMO, but it's not just unique to CMOs. Every executive who's trying to advertise either to a consumer or even to another business has run into a brick wall. We've done it the same way, essentially, for a long, long time. We do email. We used to do old mail. We do email. It's no longer working. And why? Because all of us have become so good at researching long before we ever talk to the company. So in contrast to what we were grappling with just a couple of years ago, where it was about, I want to advertise to get them to come to me so I can just tell you all this wonderful thing about my product or service. Now, I have to put everything I can on the website, think about basically making sure you get the right research, because I don't even know you're out there until you come to my site. And the latest data says you are 60% of the way down a purchase decision by the time I even know you exist. So you put that back into context for what we're talking today. Anything that the technologies can provide for a company that says, you know what, you can be much more efficient. Rather than just broadcasting to everyone, you can narrowcast, if you will, to the people who you know already actually are starting to research the product or service or anything that you're selling. You can be far more efficient. Now, that's the happy face side. There's the bad face side, which we talked about all morning, which is there's a lot of private information that does get tracked. And from a marketer perspective, that helps me be better, but there is definitely a fuzzy line, and every marketer kind of is doing this a little bit. So.
Thanks. Jason Kent, we'll go to you. Jason is the Chief Executive Officer of Digital Content Next, which is a trade organization for digital content companies. Think about networks like ABC or the BBC or the Harvard Business Review or the National Geographic.
Well, the New York Times, which Lori made famous during her presentation. So just state it, where are we right now? Ironically, 20 years in, we still have a lot of work to do in the digital advertising marketplace. Take it back to the consumer, which matters more than anything. Digital advertising, and I'm the digital guy telling you this, is trusted less than any other form of advertising. Nielsen does a study every year, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about email, banners, social media, mobile, is at the bottom. Television is much more trusted by consumers, magazines, you name it. So we're clearly doing something wrong. Most of digital advertising and most of the work that's been done in the last 10 years has been, and we're talking billions of dollars, has gone into tracking individuals so you can target them at the right place, the right time with the right message, one-on-one. Consumers certainly don't seem to be that attracted to that option to the point that they're boycotting ads entirely. We now have ad blocking growing at a pretty healthy rate. It's now 15 to 20% of the US population. 40 to 50 million people have completely opted out of advertising entirely. That's what pays for the content. And so we've got a problem, and we need to have an honest discussion around it. And we've got 2,000 to 3,000 ad tech companies that are in the business of tracking people around the web that are having trouble coming to grips to that. So I'll start there.
So with that backdrop, if someone came to you and said, what would be the best way to advertise right now, today, would you say, oh, you should still do it online, but have Kim Ye tweet about your product? Or what do you say is the best?
Well, the part that hasn't really built out yet in digital is the brand advertising piece, the piece where in classic great advertising, what it does is it actually makes you think differently about a product. It changes your minds and emotion around a brand. It actually builds demand for a later date. And that's what great advertisers do. We've built digital advertising and really some very, very powerful companies that are really good at direct marketing, which is what showed up in your mailbox for years, right? So they've gotten really good at trying to get you to click something and do an action. But I would, the more the industry focuses on finding ways to improve creative, improve the quality of the advertising experience, to think about clean, kind of well-lit environments that make consumers happy, we'll be much better off for the industry.
Okay, so Seth Levine, we'll go to you. Seth's the managing director of Foundry Group, which is a venture capital firm here in Boulder, which focuses on early stage tech investment. And so I'm particularly interested in you because you're sort of thinking about these companies before they're big.
Pressure, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let me riff off a little bit of what's already been said. So I think we're in this weird time where we've got these like series of massive paradoxes going on in advertising, right? One is that the entire system is set up to spend money in massive bulk because that's how the advertising world gets paid, right? If you work for a big media holding company, you want to push as much volume, much dollar volume as you can. That's why TV continues to sort of be the gold standard, and I think it's why people in that world love video advertising online, because they can both repurpose things that they've already already created for television, but also because the CPMs, the rates are as high as possible, right? So that's in direct contrast to, or conflict with, this idea of kind of narrowcast, right? So we've been in a broadcast, literally a broadcast world back up until the internet, and then still for a while, relative broadcast. I will create a banner ad, I will push it out to a whole bunch of people, and now we're moving into more of a narrowcast world. Hey, I know Jason is interested in skiing. Not just that, I know Jason's interested in this pair of skis, and I will advertise it to him. And so those two things are in conflict, right? And there's lots and lots of examples of that, I think, across the advertising ecosystem that we're going to have to sort of come to grips with and figure out sort of who wins. I think the privacy thing, which we'll get into, I'm sure, is a really interesting one, right? People want to take control of their own data, and that absolutely sounds reasonable until you realize what happens is when I control my own data or I start blocking a bunch of ads, I give all the power to Google, Facebook, Twitter, the massive publications. I'll pause on that because I know we're going to talk about another question that's more relevant to. Again, huge paradox, right? Privacy sounds good. Sorry, Rob, but giving power to small number of platforms, probably not what the regulators intended when they started propagating some of these privacy laws. So massive, massive conflict. The other thing I think we're seeing, which is really interesting, which has been true also from an investment perspective, if I think back sort of 15 years ago, people, the third rail, one of the third rails of investing was MarTech, right? No one was investing in MarTech because marketing people didn't have any actual budget. And now what we've seen is this massive shift from sort of the advertising side to the marketing side, right? People think about advertising as starting way further back in the funnel because I want to start cultivating different people. I need to have very different messages for Jason versus Janet versus Scott. And so I think what the other thing we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is this incredible rise of the marketing tech stack and allowing people to create more customized content, but to do it in a programmatic or automated way.
Great.
I could just keep talking. I talk really fast.
Well,
Really
welcome
excited about
back.
advertising technology.
Me too. Rob Sherman, you're the Deputy Chief Privacy Officer of Facebook. Maybe start by just telling us what is Facebook?
What is Facebook?
Just kidding.
Did you see that look? Did she really ask me that?
Blake told me to ask you about fake news, but I decided not.
It's a whole nother panel.
So Facebook is an innovator in advertising, and I'm wondering, same question to you. What do you see today?
So it's interesting, when I think about what I see today and what the future holds, I actually think about a lot of the things that Lori was talking about, and sort of what the history of digital advertising is. And when you think back a long time ago, it's 10 years ago, and digital advertising is a long time for most of us. When you're not on the internet, 10 years is not that long. But when you think about it, most of us were using one computer with one browser. It was probably, if you were like 70% of the world, it was Internet Explorer. And you consumed a set of content in one place, and you did everything that way. And so over the couple of years after that, the Lumascape, the map of like the many companies that are involved in delivering an ad online that Lori showed, that grew up, and they were all involved in trying to make sure that they could optimize an advertiser spending money to deliver an ad. And so the original result of that, I think you heard this from a lot of the folks on the panel, is not that good, right? Like if you think about the early internet advertising experience, it was like a lot of pop-ups and a lot of ads that were either spammy or for things that you would never buy in your life. And so it just wasn't a good experience. And so I think like when we think about what's going to happen over time and what needs to happen, it needs to become better. And so, I think we have definitely become better. I'm not sure that we've solved the problem yet. And I think that's hopefully a lot of what we'll talk about. But so when you think about what that's trying to accomplish, the good kind of advertising, if it's working well, it is creating value for the people that are seeing it, right? So if you're seeing an ad and you have no interest in buying that product, that's certainly not good for you. That's not good for the advertiser because they're spending money to reach somebody who's not going to buy their product. And for a company like Facebook, we think a lot about this. We actually commissioned a study similar to the one that Lori showed about why are people using ad blockers. And we should talk about the reasons for that because they're actually not the ones that like somebody like me who spends my day thinking about privacy thinks about. But we're a repeat business, right? So one of the reasons why we spend a lot of time understanding how people consume advertising is because if in sort of the generic case, if you're just an ad tech company, if you're any ad tech company, you want to get somebody to click on that ad so you can get paid for it. For Facebook, we have people coming back day after day after day, and if they are frustrated by their ad experience, if they feel like it's bad for them in some way, they're not going to continue to consume those ads, and they're not going to keep coming back. So we've thought a lot about, what needs to happen next. And so one big thing is, and I think, Laura, you got into this too, is sort of making things more relevant. The biggest complaint that we got, a lot of it was disruption, slowing down page loads, security concerns, but also relevance. That was a huge one, right? People were saying, like, why are you going to interrupt my experience and show me this thing that doesn't matter? And so a lot of the work is in creating better advertisements, things that people feel are worth their time. Like if they have to see advertisements, I should see good ones. And ideally, we're actually creating value so people are learning about products and services that they want to learn about. So that's sort of part one. I think part two of what we'll need to see and what we're starting to see is better and more meaningful control for people. So it's not a good experience if you're having this. A lot of people either find value in the ad experience or don't object to it and understand that it's part of how they get a free and open internet. But some people have concerns about seeing particular kinds of advertisements or ads that are targeted in a certain way. And I don't think it should be in any of our interests to show people ads that they're strongly objecting to seeing. And so a big part of solving that problem is giving people the ability to have really meaningful control over, I don't want to see ads that are targeted to me because I'm interested in this topic, or I don't want to see ads that are targeted to me in this way. And if we're doing that well and making that meaningful rather than a sort of check the box exercise, I think that's going to help address a lot of the concerns. But I think in terms of like what the trend is, I think a lot of it comes back to just like making the advertising experience itself better.
So can I ask a question as follow up on that?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a provocative question. I'll preface with saying that I have an investment in a company that also does anti-ad block. But Facebook's been very public to basically say, look, we don't care if you're running an ad blocker. We're going to show you an ad. Do publishers have the right to show advertising to users? From your perspective, I'm interested because Facebook has sort of said yes. Of course, you have a lot of data, so I think part of the answer might be for you, well, we're going to show better ads. But you are showing ads to a bunch of people who have said, no, I've got an ad blocker, I don't want to see ads for whatever reason that may be valid, maybe not.
Yeah, so for just a little bit of background just for folks who don't know. So I guess it was probably over the summer in August, we announced some improvements to the way that people can control ads on Facebook. There were new ways that you could tailor the kinds of advertising you were seeing. As a part of that, we also decided that we were going to begin showing ads to people on Facebook who were using ad blockers. And I think a lot of the research that I talked about went into that, right? So, and we did it in a way that didn't involve additional collection of information. It didn't implicate any of the privacy concerns that we were talking about earlier today. But the reality is it costs a lot of money to run Facebook. And we think it's important for us to be able to show ads so that so that we're earning revenue on that. But more broadly than that, we also think that advertising is a part of the value that people get from Facebook, right? One of the things that people are getting, if we're doing our jobs well, is actually being able to learn about products and services. So I think we learn about products and services that are useful to them. And if we're not doing that well, then it's something that we work on doing better. But I think it's one of those things where I think we need to have a conversation about the way that the internet works, right? And that if you want to consume free services, then part of that is enabling there to be value. And if we're doing it well, then you're getting value, the advertiser's getting value, and people are staying on Facebook, which is what we want to accomplish.
Great. So I kind of want to stay on the thread of troublesome advertising, and I want to start again with you, Scott, to say, what do you find troublesome about advertising or different forms of advertising? And that could either be from the standpoint of running a business and feeling like policies are getting in the way, or me as a consumer, I'm scared about what's happening with my data.
Yeah, I mean, coming from like being a marketer and working for a company obviously that's selling to marketers, the biggest challenge we have is around transparency in the market. It's kind of interesting because you have a lot of data out there, but not a lot of transparency. And what I mean by that is, Seth mentioned earlier, is we do a lot of advertising on what's called ad exchanges and programmatic buying, which is basically where publishers kind of put their inventory and marketers be able to bid on it like a stock exchange in that regard. And because there's hundreds of thousands of websites out there, it's hard to control them all. And what you get is a lot of sketchy websites, obviously, and a lot of what they call fraud or bot fraud. So it's basically, if click-through rate is what's important or getting a lot of clicks, you have a lot of fraud where technology is basically, robots are basically clicking on ads, and you're spending a lot of your money not even hitting a human. And so as a marketer, we have those types of challenges. And so the data helps us kind of sift through that to get that much closer to making sure that we limit that for our marketers in that regard.
Great, thanks. My turn? It doesn't work very well. That's the biggest problem. I mean, at the end of the day, again, B2C, B2B, we are all struggling for what is the magic bullet that says, I'm going to do these sets of activities and I can guarantee that I'm going to get this kind of result. And advertising has been ever thus, but as the channels have become much more diffused, we have less and less success, I'll put it that way. I mean, we get excited when it's like 2%, you know? So,
Is there some world in which it is working, like people are getting the information they need and they just don't need the product?
I think this is just, I have this thing that's called JPTs, which are Janet's personal theories. So this is JPT. I think when you have a very narrow product set and you have a very loyal audience, that it works really, really well. Because I think, again, Rob said it well. It's like if I'm delivering the information they really want to have, it's actually making their life better. Where most of us marketers struggle is I am starting out at the evangelical side of the marketing, which is you don't even know about what I have. And now I have to educate you on what I have and how it could actually solve a problem that you probably didn't even think you had either. So advertising is just not very good at that. It's much more effective at one-on-one. So that's my biggest challenge. Thanks.
Can I riff a little off? Okay. So flipping back to the publisher side, and I want to answer a question Seth asked too here. So we have 80 members in our organization. It's literally every content brand you could think of, from television, magazines, newspapers, and native digital companies. These are the people that create the actual content you consume. No matter entertainment, ESPN, Washington Post, you name it. It's not working well. The stuff we're supposed to be here talking about, the behavioral advertising, the tracking piece, the data that fuels it, is a very, very small percentage of the revenue to our membership. To kind of size the market so you kind of understand what's going on here, we have about $7 billion of advertising across our membership in digital. And the kind that relies on data across the web is a single-digit percentage of that. It's almost immaterial. A majority of digital advertising is the kind that tracks people across the web, collects data, and tries to hit them with that relevant message. The industry that we've built, digital advertising, and I got way more attention than I expected for this a few weeks ago, is growing about 20%, a 20% clip year over year. It's been for a while. 100% of that growth is going to Google and Facebook. Two companies, their collective growth, according to their quarterly earnings, 10Qs, is actually as big as the growth of the industry. What do those two companies have in common? The top 10 trackers of data and tags across the web are Google and Facebook tags. And so we've built an industry with an enormous amount of data collection capability that's fueling a massive amount of growth for just a couple companies that don't actually create any content. So, sorry, I wanted to get it out.
Yeah,
and to answer
that's
Seth's
good.
question that I want to answer, the consumer has a right to an ad blocker. I get looked at when I say that because I'm the guy representing the publishers. But they have a right. It's their computer, it's their device. As long as the publisher has the right to say, you can't use my website if you have an ad blocker. That's every one of our members has a direct relationship with consumers and with advertisers. And it's built on trust and a value exchange. And any party can walk away at any point, as long as the other party can walk away.
We could go down. I want to answer that question.
Ben's heard me source points that a lot.
I'd love to go down this rabbit hole a little bit because I actually think that it's so. For your membership, got it. That makes sense, right?
Yep.
They're big publishers. They have relationships
Small
with
publishers,
the
too.
internet.
Yep.
I think well, I'll say this and then
Okay.
I'll move on. I think we need to be really, really careful about the ramifications of what happens to an internet where a bunch of people are ceding power to the largest publishers. We'll talk about that more later, but I worry a lot about that.
Who
And not that I
would
don't-
be the largest in your mind?
would be it'd be any publisher who actually has enough of a relationship with their constituents to get them to turn an ad blocker off or have some sort of alternative ad experience. And my concern is for one of our companies works with a lot of small publishers, and one of the things that we're hearing from those publishers is that they are very concerned about what happens in a world where ad block becomes more prevalent. And we could also talk about how most of ad block isn't blocking ads. It's just a consortium of people that are blackmailing each other to show the ads that they want to show, and that's a separate thing. There are some ad blockers that actually legitimately block ads. But anyway, those small publishers are very worried about what happens in a world where it's hard to drive users, because most users are either coming from Facebook, Twitter, other places like that, and where people have an ad block, but they don't have the relationship with a customer that will allow them to put an interstitial up and say, please disable your ad block, or please watch this other different alternative ad experience, and instead people will just click away to the next site. If you're the New York Times and someone wants to consume your content, you have the ability to do that. Anyway, that was more than I wanted to go on that. But
I mostly agree with that. Yeah, mostly agree with
so
that.
I think we need to be careful about that, right? So we'll talk about that more. The answer to your question, which will be a little bit tangential, is that one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently that I think is going to massively change how the digital ecosystem works is header bidding, which is this like sort of technical way that that companies show advertising or sort of kick off the ad request is probably the better way to say it. And what happened was Google was essentially front-ending all these auctions because their ad server was the main ad server, and so their auction exchange was able to bid even when the ad server was calling for like a house ad, something that a publisher sold directly. And header bidding became this sort of clever workaround because when you call for an ad in the header, it basically doesn't hit the old style ad server. I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't get too technical. And so, but what's happened is now there's this crazy proliferation of ad requests. So where perhaps on a normal web page there'd be 3 ads, and each would daisy chain a little bit, and you'd kick off, I don't know, 15 different ad requests of some kind. Now you might kick off 150 ad requests through header bidding. That has serious implications to the cost structure for advertising. It has very serious implications to data leakage because all of these different advertising companies are firing off beacons or collecting information on each ad request. And so now instead of 15, you've got 150. Yesterday, Amazon announced that they were going to offer for publishers, actually, I'm sure you're hearing from your members about this, a server-side header bidding solution, right? So everyone's sort of implementing this. And I think we haven't quite come to grips about what that means, about where all the data goes, and then also just the infrastructure that's required to handle, a billion ad requests versus 10 billion ad requests. It just costs a whole lot more money. And we are seeing this in some of our portfolio companies who are having to scale up from a server perspective. It's just costing them a whole lot more to manage this infrastructure load.
So I want to stay with you just for 1 second. Is there any advertising model that if you saw that in a prospective company, you'd say, we're not going to invest in this company?
Meaning how they were going to make money?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I would invest in a company that, this was popular back in the early sort of 2000s. Everyone was going to build such and such app and they were going to monetize it with advertising. And oh, by the way, if that doesn't work, we're going to collect a lot of data, so we'll be a data services business too. So I think in general, I probably wouldn't be interested in a business that had advertising as its sole model. In terms of ad tech businesses, there's a lot of trends that are happening that we'd probably be cognizant about from an investment perspective. Third-party cookies are going away. I worry about, there's some fingerprinting and some other things that are going on that I think are like a little bit outside of what's reasonable. I think Europe is moving very strongly towards more privacy considerations. I think ultimately, well, maybe not now, the U.S., actually maybe we won't be adopting that. But a couple weeks ago, I thought the U.S. might be moving more in that direction to more of a European model. Yeah. But even if you are a U.S.-based company, if you are touching a European customer, you're subject to, at least for those customers, you're subject to those laws. So I think about that a lot as it relates to the types of businesses that can be successful in advertising.
Great.
Up until a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, I was concerned about the buy side because it's so hard to make money on that. But
not anymore.
Not anymore.
I've lost like $20 million investing on the buy side, but I did it again just to see if I can make it back up. I'm doubling down.
The water's free.
Yeah, right.
Okay, Rob.
So, I mean, I think, I agree with, I think, a lot of what's been said, actually. I mean, I think the proliferation of lots and lots of different pixel fires and lots of different data going in lots of different directions can be challenging, particularly when it has the effect of undermining the user experience, right? When you go to the New York Times, and I shouldn't pick on them, it's just that's the example that we've been using of the website. When you go to a web page and it takes a really long time to load because it's loading all of these other things, like that's not a good experience. It's not a good experience for all of those things to be going in lots of different directions. I might disagree though with Seth. One of the things I heard you say, which is that we worry about companies asking people to make choices about their advertising, right? Saying like turn off your ad blocker or agree to this kind of advertising or things like that because they have the ability, because they're providing value to people and enabling them to, and somebody saying like, yeah, this content's worth it to me, so I'm willing to do that. I mean, I actually think we don't want to be in a world necessarily where there's a lot of companies that I've never heard of that are collecting data about me, and there's nothing really I can do about that. I think a better world is I know the companies that I'm interacting with. I can see what data they have. I can tell them not to do it if they want to, and I actually have a relationship with those organizations. So I would actually say, like, I think if I'm picking sort of the world that I want to live in, it's the world where I know who I'm dealing with and I can have a relationship, and especially when that relationship is of enough value that I'm willing to say, yeah, I'd like to see ads from you if it means I get this content.
To me, it's more of a net. So this is a great debate. To me, it's more like net neutrality, right? I feel if I was Facebook, I would totally agree with that because Facebook has the power. But I don't think that I worry about what that means to smaller upstart publishers that don't have the ability to say to potential visitors who may not know them, right? Their first experience might be coming to their page to see this article that they found through someone sharing it on Facebook, let's say, that this interstitial comes up, and they've then got to make a decision. Do I want to essentially pay for this experience by allowing this website to show me advertising or show me something before I get to the website? I do worry about that, what the implications are for that for smaller publishers, for upstart publishers, for people that aren't able to collect data en masse and already have a relationship with customers. I get the argument. I'm just worried about it.
I think what you're making is not a privacy argument, right? I mean, it is a sort of how the ecosystem should work argument. But I would say about the ecosystem, and Jill, I know you want to move on, but I would say about the ecosystem argument, like the reality is that Facebook and large publishers and small publishers we all do better if we all do better. Right, so people are on Facebook and they want to consume content from the New York Times and from small startup publishers as well. And people are on Facebook the more good content they see. And so it's in our interest for that content to exist and for it to be monetized and to help people find that content and get to those websites. So I think if the ecosystem is working well in the way that you say it should be in those publishers' interest for Facebook to do well so that Facebook can help people find their content, and it's in Facebook's interest for people to find those publishers. So hopefully, I mean, to the extent that's not working, that's something we should talk about. But I think actually it's much less inconsistent than you're presenting.
So you're absolutely right. And in that moment, I was making a ecosystem argument, but let me turn it to a privacy argument, because one of the things that I'm very concerned about that's happening in the ad tech ecosystem is it's happening in Europe. I'm going to forget you guys.
GDPR.
GDPR, thank you. I knew it.
2018.
And basically, that's the European regulators saying, hey, simplifying it greatly here, but basically you have to have a direct relationship with someone to collect data on them in any way. And I think, and again, that's great for Facebook, Google, Twitter,
It's actually
potentially New York Times, other people that already have first party logged in, I know who you are, you're Seth Levine on Facebook kind of data. That potentially kills the entire advertising model, at least the third party advertising model, meaning using exchanges, using third party ad networks for essentially every other. Again, the law as it's currently considered is very extreme, right? I need to actually get your permission to use any piece of data anywhere down the line. If I've grabbed a piece of data from you, I need to actually, and then you're going to use it. You need to have the permission from that user to use it. We'll see how that actually gets implemented. We'll also see how
can I jump in? Yeah, I mean,
but I worry that again, this is all part of the same thing, and so I made an ecosystem argument, but also from a privacy perspective, if we take privacy all the way to where Europe is thinking it's going to take it, that also has implications for particularly smaller websites who are using third-party advertising networks and exchanges to monetize their content.
Can I jump in there, because I'll stick on the privacy piece, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, and Rob, in some ways we coexist. Sometimes we're very much competition. The GDPR in Europe it's happening, and it's law. It's not going to be stopped. We actually think it could be good for publishers, and therefore it's definitely going to be good for consumers. And the thing that gets misunderstood in all these discussions, and Lori did a fabulous presentation, I thought, in terms of explaining this, is the distinction between first party and third party, a direct relationship and an indirect relationship. And just because you're Google or Facebook doesn't mean you're always a first party, no matter where the user is. It matters with the context of the relationship. And so if you're on some other website, New York Times or ESPN, even if you have a direct relationship with Facebook, if you're on the New York Times, that's not a first party relationship, it's a third party relationship. And so in Europe, you're going to need to get explicit consent from Facebook, from Google, to actually collect your data when you're browsing across the web. And I actually think that puts the value back in the hands of the consumer and then the companies they choose to do business with. If you don't like the experience you're getting on the New York Times or on any of our smaller members, Gimlet or Vox, et cetera, these smaller native digital companies, you can choose not to use the products. Just like if you don't like the experience when you walk in Target, you can choose not to go to Target. That's a healthy relationship, no matter big or small. Did I get anything wrong there?
No, I agree with you.
Cool.
Do you want to respond to that?
Well, again, in the abstract.
And I do care about the small people. I do.
No, I understand. This is a great debate. So in the abstract, does it make sense for consumers to control their data? Absolutely. In practice, does that mean that the ecosystem might develop in ways that we don't want, and we're giving a huge amount of power to a small number of people that have, small number of publishers, to be clear, that have the ability to ask their consumers for permission to use their data, right, or have it implicit in using, when I'm on Facebook, I expect to be targeted by Facebook data, right, so that won't change. But I worry about giving power. I worry that sort of privacy that sounds reasonable, hey, would you like to control your data and what gets shown to you?
Are you worried it's bad for consumers? Or just the publishers?
Yes, I think it's bad. It will ultimately, again, this is one of those weird arguments, because if you ask someone, would you like to control what advertising is shown to you, most people will say, well, yeah, no, I'd like to have a say in that, right? Would you like to destroy the internet in the process? Well, wait a minute. Yeah, we can argue whether that really destroys
I
the
just want to be
internet,
able to
or whether some of
say,
these small publishers should just go away.
I just want to be able to say, I don't want to be tracked outside the context of the web. I don't want to be tracked across the web by any company and have that be honored. That's a simple request.
All right.
Go ahead.
I have
By the way, I run
enjoyed this
Do Not
wormhole.
Track on not all my web browsers, but some of them, so I get it.
It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, right, because I also run the little tracker so I can see which pixels are firing.
I've enjoyed this wormhole. I'm going to take us back a little bit. And I want to get to this. Where are we actually going? What does the future hold? Before we do that, I want to know, how are you measuring effectiveness? And so again, I'm going to start with you and say, what makes an ad effective from a quantitative perspective?
Sure. I mean, it all depends on the strategy of the marketer and what they're trying to solve. And in the simplest ways, there's kind of two ways that an advertiser may go out with an ad campaign. One is like they want to just basically measure, did someone purchase the product? Did this ad influence someone to purchase the product? And ad effectiveness there is usually evaluated maybe by what they call a cost per acquisition or a return on ad spend. In other words, especially if it's an online product, you can track that. You know if someone actually purchased that product online, and from a digital perspective, you understand which channel or tactic got you to purchase that. And then you're basically looking at how much did I spend compared to how much they actually spent on their side, and you figure it out that way. The other side, as we were talking about earlier, is brand advertising, which is less about did I purchase or did they purchase an ad, but are they aware of my ad? Are they aware of my product, or are they more likely to consider purchasing my product? There, as mentioned earlier, it's harder to track. It's harder because it's a mindset. It's not necessarily an action, give or take, but we try to measure it by an action. From a mindset perspective, we'll use a brand study, and I'm sure you've all seen those on the web as you see an ad and you're asked a question and you exit out and try to ignore it, of course. But that is one way that advertisers have been trying to figure out, did I change mindset, is by asking, did you see XYZ ad in the last 24 hours, or how likely are you to consider XYZ product? Another way, though, is engagement. So you see a video, Did I like the video? Did I share the video? Did I comment on the video? And things like that. And engagement also on your website. So those are all aspects of potential measurement. A lot of the industry tends to focus a lot on click-through rate and clicks. I hate that metric personally because there's so much fraud, as I mentioned earlier, but most people don't click. That question's, is it effective? And what we tend to see is, yeah, a lot of people may view the ad, be influenced by it, but then go to your website or search in Google or something like that. That doesn't mean that it wasn't effective. It's just you have to look at other ways of measurement. And so now that we have so much ways of measuring advertising online, and we're becoming more sophisticated, there's all different ways depending on the objective itself.
Great, thanks.
I don't know that I can add that much to what Scott just said. That's exactly right. I mean, you, at the end of the day, are placing a bet of $1 that you're spending on any number of media, and you're saying, I want to get a return on that. I want to prove that someone's going to buy my product as a result. And, from a broader marketing perspective, you're using a variety of tools. And so often we will look at how are things tracking year over year. And what I can say is without question that traditional forms of marketing are receding in effectiveness, and digital is increasing by orders of magnitude.
So that's a perfect segue. Let's talk about where are we going, what's next, and is Do Not Track going to become this thing that destroys the models and ruins everything? Is that the bigger issue, or is this incredibly detailed amount of data that advertisers have about consumers? Is that the thing we should be worried about? Where are we going?
I'll jump in. Do Not Track will not. I've advocated for Do Not Track, so I've written a lot about that over the last 4 years. And so having an actual choice mechanism for the consumer that's persistent and actually works, that's simple and easy to understand, one click, is a good thing. And it's competing right now. We've got, if you really take a step back and think about it, the program that Lori went through, the Ad Choices program, is competing with ad blocking as solutions for the consumer. And ad blocking's kicking its butt. And so you now have 50% growth year over year in ad blocking. Going into last year, it's slowed a bit with the shift to mobile, but it's happening. And so I've actually got our members thinking, this is the provocative piece, is thinking about that audience of 50 million Americans now that aren't actually getting ads except for when you hack through them. How are you actually going to deliver advertising to those people? And because and actually, by the way, they over-index to millennials. 50% of 18 to 30-year-old males have an ad blocker. So you need to think about that audience. If I was going to invest, if I was an investor here, I'd be thinking about what's the opportunity with those 50 million people, because they're growing and they're the future. And I think the companies that actually have something to give of value to the consumer, that are known brands, whether they're advertisers or they're publishers, that the consumer trusts, are in a unique position to actually do well there in that marketplace. And the third parties that have no relationship with the consumer, that are kind of vendor intermediaries, that actually right now are sucking out 55% of the dollars, by the way, in that supply chain. 55% go to the intermediaries. They're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I think a lot of those intermediaries go away. We have placed a bet, well, you know that, but we placed a bet on a company that's going to try to sort of work with publishers not to reinsert ads, which is, I think, what everyone for a little while thought that they wanted. Like, they were all, especially in Europe, everyone's really worried about ad blocking, and all the publishers basically got together and they said, hey, how do we reinsert ads, right? And there were a bunch of court cases in Germany about whether that was even legal or not. And for a little while, that's what they wanted. But really, I think what needs to happen is someone needs to create, you could call it like the Spotify of content, like some way for consumers to subscribe, if you will, either through viewing behavior. I'll watch a 30-second advertising, video ad, and then I can browse all of these different sites for whatever, 24 hours. Or maybe I pay a monthly subscription like I do to Spotify, and I get to listen to music. And obviously someone's getting paid, right? Spotify deals with kind of the back end of that. So we have actually invested in a company called SourcePoint that's trying to do that, working with primarily large publishers. I do continue, not to drumbeat, but I do continue to worry about the smaller guys
I do too.
maybe we'll solve that through, we work all over the advertising ecosystem, so we've got a company now on the buy side, we've got a bunch of stuff on the sell side, and then we've got some people trying to basically disintermediate everything by becoming the Spotify of content. So I guess hopefully we'll win on one or more of those. But I do think that in the future we will have the ability to create some meaningful preferences, not just this binary, don't show me ads, right? And then a bunch of smart technical people like the folks at Facebook say, no, we're going to show you ads anyway because you can do that. I think we're going to move beyond that to a part where I can say, look, I don't want to see ads, but this is what I want to see. I'm willing to watch a video ad. I'm willing to see a limited number of ads. I'm willing to see ads based on this set of preferences that I've just defined. I'm willing to pay $10 a month and not see any ads. I think we're going to move at least part of the internet to that kind of model.
So I think that some of the choice tools that we've talked about, ad blockers or those kinds of things, are a symptom of a larger problem which we've talked about, and I think part of that is people are not feeling like the ads they're seeing are worthy of the time that they're spending to see them. Like that's just and it's unfortunate, but that's true. I mean I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think the advertising that's going to be successful and that's going to evolve over the long term is ads that are just more respectful of people. And I think of that in two ways. So one is, and I'll actually I'll give the New York Times as an example, just because we've been using them as an example, and because they've been really public about this. But so I think one thing that's responsive is actually like giving people ads that seem more responsive to what they're likely to want. And so what the New York Times did is they actually segmented the people who visit their website into, people who visit their website occasionally and look at the art section or look at the sports section or whatever. And then people who spend a medium amount of time on their site, and then people who spend a lot of time on their site. And so they're sending different kinds of advertisements to those people, to each of those people. So the people who spend a little bit of time in the art section are going to get suggestions for more stories that they might be interested in the art section to get them back to their website. People who are in the medium group are going to get suggestions to subscribe to a newsletter for an area for a section that they're interested in, or to download the mobile app. And then people who spend a lot of time are going to get offers for subscriptions. And so it's rather than just sort of blanketing the world with one ad, what you're going to see is, I think that based on a limited piece of information about what how frequently you use our website, we're going to give you something that actually is going to probably meet a need that you have. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing, and Seth, you alluded to this too, is ad tech that just says like, this is what it is, we're going to show you a bunch of ads, you don't really know how you got them. That's probably going to be hard to sustain. So I mean, we've been doing a lot of work on this at Facebook. So on Facebook now, anytime you see an ad, you can find out actually why did you see that ad, which doesn't exist in a lot of places. And what we found is people got worried, when they saw ads and they said like, that it's surprising to me that I see this particular kind of ad. But when you actually explain, oh, you're seeing this ad for this car because you like the pages of Honda, Ford, and Toyota on Facebook, then they understand, that's why I saw the ad, and it's not as surprising to them. And so actually saying to them, we think you're interested in cars based on this information. Do you want to see ads that we target to you based on the fact that we think you're interested in cars? And you might say no. And people should have the ability to do that. And I think more and more, I hope, we're going to see efforts to move beyond the sort of like, I don't like ads that are bad, so I'm going to block all of them, or ads that are disruptive, or whatever word we want to use, to this model where people are actually going to be able to make choices and say, these are the kinds of ads I'm okay with, these are the kinds of ads I'm not. And when they do see ads, they're going to be more valuable.
Do you know what percentage of Facebook users actually click on that? Why am I seeing this ad?
I don't know a percentage. I mean, there's millions of users, but I don't know as a percentage.
Okay. You don't know if it's like most of them, hardly
I don't
any?
know.
Okay.
1.6 billion.
It is probably less than 1.6 billion, but I mean, I remember that when we first rolled it out, it was much more heavily used than what we thought, and that was obviously a really positive thing for us, having put the work into putting it together. But I think so I don't know the total numbers. I do know subjectively we did a bunch of focus groups and had conversations with folks in different parts of the world, and I think subjectively people found it really valuable just to be able to know. And also not just to know, but to be able to do something about it. If they want to see more of a particular kind of ad or less, they can actually do that. I think it improved people's satisfaction a lot.
Great, thanks. Do you guys have?
I was actually going to throw out a question to my esteemed colleagues. And I'm intrigued, having run a company before several years ago, where we were really focused on demographics. So I'm going to ask the three of you, and Scott, you can chime in too. To me, I'm going to make an observation and ask a question. When we looked at demographics, there was a vast difference between, I hate to admit it, big baby boomer here, I'm older than all of you people. Baby boomers had a certain set of characteristics, and we dominated the landscape for years because we were the largest demographic by far. Poor Gen X, you had half as many people. Now you have the millennial generation and of course the generation coming up behind it. And every generation has its own characteristics. So I am not at all surprised when you, Jason, described that the big ad blockers are coming from the millennials. Why? Because they have grown up much more than the baby boomers ever did with digital, and they're like, this is my territory. Where the baby boom generation grew up at a time when you had 3 channels, and you watched commercials because that's how you got your content. So there's actually, I think, and this is where my question is going to come, real differences in the generation. So let me now frame the question. When you think about the generations to come, so the millennial generation now is the largest by far, and the generation after that, the Gen Z, if you want to call her zero, whatever we're calling it now, how are they going to react differently to this question about privacy? Because there's this real dichotomy that I observe all the time that in the millennial generation, and you're one of them, you can answer this one, they are freely able to share their information and do so with friends really readily. And yet they're, at the same time, I think, more protective of what they want to visit. So I would love to ask the question to you, looking out 10 years from now, as these generations mature, become the big buyers, what do you think is going to, how do you think their reactions are going to impact the technology? Is it going to drive what Seth is describing? Is it going to are they going to be happy with what Facebook is doing? What do you guys think?
I'll jump in first. You nailed it, and one of the biggest myths is out there is that the younger generation doesn't care about privacy. I say it all the time. I hear it all the time. I just heard it earlier today. The research doesn't support that. They're actually smarter about controls of privacy, and so that's where, if I can compliment Facebook, is their controls on their site and the way they've tried to innovate have been some of the best in the industry, if not the best in the industry, to provide for that. Now, why are they installing ad blockers at such a higher rate is because there's also this data collection happening outside those sites, and they're not getting what they want. And if you did what you need to do with that ad choices program to actually make it work and be effective and just have it on or do not track, which is kind of a very simple thing to do that the industry is fighting tooth and nail, they would have a lot of control. And I think the industry is afraid that they'll turn off tracking across the web. But ultimately, they're going to win.
I think
right? They're the future. And so, because the outcome that happens is if we don't actually shift that power back to them, then we end up with a lot of this kind of targeted direct response advertising, which actually, by the way, it doesn't, back to your measurement question, it doesn't care about where it runs. It runs on fake news or it runs on the New York Times. It performs the same way.
Exactly.
So it's not what we care about.
So you guys jump in quickly, but I do want to save a few minutes for audience questions.
Right.
Oh,
no, that's okay. It's a good question.
I thought that was a great answer, right? I think it's a fallacy that it's not that millennials don't care about privacy. They're very open with sharing of information they want to control, right? So control has some, we've sort of been talking around it, like there is potentially a future where they have control. I hope that future allows for a very open and free internet with lots and lots of
small sites.
Smaller sites. Well, small and big sites, right? I mean,
I know.
but yes, small sites too.
Yeah, I'm gonna very quickly echo what Seth and Jason said, but I think when you think about privacy, like when we were all kids, it was, I don't want my bank to tell people what I spend my money on, right? And that was sort of the basic conception of privacy. Today, 1.7-ish billion people are on Facebook, and they're on Facebook because they want to share, but I think it would be a very bad mistake to suggest that that means they don't want everything to be locked down, they just want everything to be public. Like, that's not where people are, right? People want to be able to share what they want with the people they want, and that's why we've built the controls in the way that we have. So when we look at how do we educate, and we've done a lot of work to educate teens about privacy and safety online and those sorts of things, and what we look at is they actually are really sophisticated because they've grown up with the technology in making much more granular judgments about, I want this piece of information to go to this group of people. So they know that, and actually they're spending a lot of time teaching their parents and their grandparents about it. So so I think, which is I think a fantastic thing.
We appreciate it.
So yeah, no, I think we are going to get, my hope is we're going to, because of that, get more sophisticated over time, rather than just saying like, everything gets locked down. People are going to have more choice and they're going to be more sophisticated.
Super scary thought before we go to questions as it relates to privacy is, there was a law just passed in the UK that basically said that it was a laundry list of like crazy agencies that could actually go to the ISP level, the internet provider level, and forget about what privacy settings you might have had set on your browser. On a network traffic level, actually report back. You could essentially subpoena all of the different interactions you'd had online, right? Essentially a URL list, but it's a little bit more intricate than that.
All right, and with that, audience questions.
That
Student
uplifting.
question first. Blake, you'll have to do the cold calling.
I love that rule. Student first.
It's on? Cool. My name's Colton Ray, and I'm a third-year law student here. My question is, we've talked a lot about Facebook and Google today, but with Verizon coming in and acquiring a lot of companies, the latest of which being Yahoo, do you think more competition in the advertising space will bring about more choice for consumers and therefore more options for privacy in the long run?
I wrote a piece on Recode if you want to go read it.
Or do we
yeah.
need something like government to step in and regulate this?
Yeah. I mean, they're trying to cobble together the data from AOL, from Yahoo, and the pipes, which the FCC's new rules we're going to stop them from doing, but we'll see where that goes now. And so there's a third data collector that's got the capabilities to do some of what Google and Facebook do. So depending on how you feel about what we've been talking about, you're about to get a lot more tracking of what you do. And if in the phone itself, I mean, I often do this with people, who comment on, I don't really care about privacy, et cetera, is you grab somebody's phone, just grab it off the table and take it away from them. They'll freak out, right? More than grabbing their wallet or their purse. It's the most personal thing you've got. So Verizon has that. And so, yes, more competition, maybe, but not good for consumer in my mind.
I think this was the point I was making with that little scary vignette before we went to Q&A, which is like, there are just so many other ways that people are collecting information on you. And so even if you set your browser settings, right, you're not necessarily getting what you think you're getting.
In the very back.
Hi, this is a question for anybody who wants to answer it. Post May 25th, 2018, how do you guys see the consent requirements for the GDPR affecting the culture and landscape of online advertising?
I think it's good for, I said this earlier, I think it's good for publishers, and I think it's coming, and it's not a debate, it's coming, and it's going to be good for publishers is my perspective on it. And if the what's called the cookie direct, if the way that cookies are handled and consent's handled actually lines up with do not track, that would be a nice consent mechanism to make it work. The law is there, and it has significant repercussions and fines if you don't follow it. So the folks here in the States that aren't paying enough attention to it are going to have a reckoning.
I don't think people are paying attention to it yet in the States.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had this discussion over the last couple of weeks with a handful of at least our portfolio companies, because I care about this stuff and I want us to be prepared for it. And the answer so far has been, holy shit, like, what are we going to do about this?
Right.
And we're talking about businesses that have even European operations, although obviously U.S. websites are attracting traffic from European visitors. So I don't think we've yet kind of figured out what's going to happen. We also, and while it's going to be law, it's not clear yet exactly some of the nuance of like consent and what constitutes consent. So it's going to be a little bit of a murky period where people are going to be collecting data and they're going to pretend that they have consent, and then it's going to get somewhat adjudicated, and then we'll figure out what does consent actually mean, and we'll change a lot of behavior, at least in Europe.
And I'll add just 2 more cents to that, which is something very similar happened to the old-fashioned email. So you no longer can send mass emails to anybody. And we used to do this all the time, literally millions of people on a list, and you just blast out an email. Now you cannot do that anymore by law unless you have explicit consent to get an email. So think about it from a marketer's perspective. We were like, what? We can't do that anymore? It makes us actually have to be a little bit more creative, create content. So while we're definitely not paying enough attention to this issue, there is also no question that people are going to have to get their heads together and say we've got to be much better.
So Facebook is a little bit different from in the sense that people in the U.S. don't know this often, but we have a U.S. company based in California, and then we also have a European company that serves European users that's based in Ireland. And so we have a group of people who has been spending a lot of time thinking about the GDPR and how it's going to be implemented and all those things. I think I know we're short on time. The only thing I'll add is to underscore what Seth said is that I think the short answer is like there are some things that we know the GDPR has been passed, but there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of interpretation that remains to be done. And the data protection authorities in Europe are spending the next year and a half or so working on creating interpretations of what the language means. So I think in terms of what the online advertising ecosystem will look like, there's a lot of work to be done before we really know the answer to that.
One more question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Richard Bennett. I testified before Congress about privacy back in 2008 on some of these issues, and it seems to me that we haven't really made any progress since then. If anything, advertising on the internet's a bigger problem now than it was then, just because of the volume of advertising, the number of people that are doing things like pop-ups, and the low quality. I mean, I often get ads for things that I've just purchased for days after I made the purchase. So to what extent are concerns about privacy that manifest in terms of things like do not track, maintaining that really low level of quality of advertising on the internet that I mean, it seems to me that ideally I would see a lot fewer ads than I do today, and a much greater proportion of the ads that I see would actually lead me to make a purchase. So why are we not making progress in this space?
I think it depends a little on what you mean by concerns about privacy, right? So, I mean, I think you're right that if the solution is like we should not collect any data, then we're probably not going to do a better job at not showing you an ad for something that you already bought. I think so. Part of the solution there is companies should be, I think, using data to provide a better advertising experience, so it's a better use of people's time. I mean, I think that's generally what we hear from people is that they want to have ads that are worth their time. But I think there also needs to be a component where people can make a meaningful choice. And so hopefully what you'll see is a reduction in the number of pop-ups and those sort of disruptive advertising experiences, more thoughtful use of data, but then also better control.
I'd just add there's an economic issue in that there's really no cost to serving a bad ad. So I agree, everything you said, and there hasn't been progress. There's no cost to serving a bad ad right now, meaning the data is super cheap to collect. You can create content, bots, you referenced to bots, you can create fake news, you can do all sorts of things to try to create data and serve ads. And it's super, super cheap. And so there's no real constraint. And so if you actually had a constraint from the consumer that forced the system to actually do a better job of serving higher quality ads, you'd be at a better place. If you want to compare it to the old junk mail model, the reason you still get a lot of junk mail, right? But the reason you don't get more that fits in your mailbox each day is because it actually costs money for printing that direct mail, for the postage, for the data you're renting, and then to deliver it, for the guy in the truck to deliver it. Digital doesn't have that problem. There's no real cost constraint. And so you end up with shit tons of, excuse my language, of bad ads, and there's no real cost to it, except for a consumer ultimately just saying, screw it, I'm out.
We've been experimenting
Well,
with one of our
the best
sell-side
solution I've
platforms.
seen to that so far is, and Facebook is basically the only company that will let me do this. I tell them, don't show me that ad because I already own the product. And so the way I make that bad ad go away is to give up some personal information to Facebook so they can use that to tailor my advertising experience better.
Well, we started out talking about the paradox in advertising, and this is one of those paradoxes, right? The reality is, to get a better advertising experience, you have to give up more information. One of the best advertising experiences on the internet is on Facebook. Why? Because they have so much information on you. They can actually serve ads that are very relevant to you. And by the way, if I'm an advertiser, one of the absolute best places I can advertise for many, many categories of companies is on Facebook, because they do a really good job of targeting my ad, and it tends to be more effective there. had some companies we were working with that were trying to help people advertise across a whole bunch of different platforms and optimize their ad spending. And the problem was that the optimum ad spending was to spend it on Facebook. So the reason that we didn't end up investing, but the reason that those companies weren't working was because Facebook was working so well. But that's the paradox, because in order to have a better advertising experience, you've got to give up data. I think a large portion of the internet ultimately will move to that, and there will always be this other part of the internet that, because the cost of creating the ad is so cheap, because the cost of hooking up to an exchange is so cheap, that you will always see these crappy ads with pop-ups and things like that. I was about to say we are experimenting with one of our sell-side platforms, and this might be part of the answer, where we actually charge people to serve the ad, so they can't just sort of bid crazy. And so it's sort of like a seat model, like charging them for a seat on the exchange. Now, we're not doing that with people that we know are legitimate and good advertisers, but we're doing that with some new people, basically to create a barrier to entry. So if AdX did that, and Sovereign and AppNexus and a handful of these places where people are going, these pools of ad impressions where people go to bid, started charging people for that, that might actually happen. And ironically, I talked about the danger of header bidding. One of the potential benefits of header bidding is that it might almost force these companies to do that, because they can't handle the volume of bid requests.
I'm going to cut us off there. This has been a wonderful panel. There's, I think, a 10-minute break, and then you'll be back for the future of advertising law and policy. Thank you.